Does your company have a good wellness program? See how it stacks up against the healthiest employers of Indiana and across the country. Visit us online at healthiestemployers.com to join the community and start your application today.
I mean, back in first grade, I was teaching foundational skills that my students would use the rest of their life. They won't remember me when they're 30 and 40 or when their parents teaching their children how to tie shoes and the alphabet. They won't remember me, but they will remember the skills.
Dr. Allison Barber started honing her leadership skills in Hoosier classrooms. Then duty called, and she soon found herself working out of Saddam Hussein's palace, using her expertise to set up a media center during the Gulf War. Barber eventually made her way back to Indiana, where she became the first leader of Western Governors University, Indiana, WGU Indiana. And now she's the woman in charge of the Indiana Fever.
I want every child in Indiana to have the opportunity. I mean, this is our sport. It's what we do. And every child should have that same enthusiasm and opportunity to shoot a ball through a hoop, because it's pretty spectacular.
Learn more about the amazing story and career of Indiana's own Allison Barber, community crusader, teacher, servant leader, and executive, on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. When Dr. Allison Barber was growing up in Northwest Indiana back in the 70s, she had one thing on her mind: playing sports. She vividly describes the Christmas when she received a basketball and hoop at the age of 10 as a dream come true. That was around the same time, fourth grade, when she met her future husband, Lyndon. They've been together now for more than 30 years and seen it all, including that time in Iraq, which ironically is where her great-grandparents immigrated from. From that experience in the Middle East to her years educating Hoosiers to taking on the role as the first chancellor at Western Governors University, Indiana, to now serving as president and COO of the Indiana Fever, I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Allison Barber to the Business and Beyond podcast. Allison, always great to be with you.
Thank you, Gary. Happy to be with you too.
Yeah. You know, it seems like yesterday, it was just a few years ago when we met, actually, which you had virtually just gotten off the plane, arriving here to take the chancellor's role at WGU Indiana. You were kind enough to come on the show. I will always remember that.
I will too, because I was really, that's so true. We flew into town from Washington, D.C. to launch WGU Indiana, and you were the first person to help me share that story of this amazing university. And, you know, Gary, when you and I sat on those, remember the old couches on this set, and we sat there and, you know, we had 200 students enrolled in WGU and 7 graduates. And now 11 years later, over 12,000 graduates and, over 10,000 students enrolled. So we watched you and I really launched something that became very special and important to the future success of Hoosiers. And it was such a joy to be on the show with you. And boy, it was, I'd never lived in Indianapolis and didn't know anyone here. So you were one of the first people I met, and how fortunate for me.
What really attracted you? You have education, certainly in your family, a strong lineage to education and linkage to education. But what really attracted you to the WGU Indiana model and wanting to take on that challenge?
What was interesting is I had been working, as you mentioned, I'd been working in Washington, D.C. for almost over 20 years. In my role at the Pentagon and at the White House, my paths would cross with Mitch Daniels, who had then left the Bush administration and become the governor of Indiana. Every time I saw Mitch, he would say, "Don't forget to move home. Don't forget to move home. You can't stay in DC forever. Don't forget to move home." And so one day, my husband and I decided it was probably time for us to transition back to Indiana to be close to our family that all might move down from Northwest Indiana to Indianapolis. I reached out to Mitch and just said, "You said move home. We're moving home. Is there anything I can do to be helpful to you and your administration to help advance, the work you're doing to make our state so wonderful?" And he was generous enough to have me come in and meet with some of his policy advisors to talk about different issues that they were working on to see if there might be a fit. And, Gary, the first thing they talked to me about was WGU. I'd never heard of Western Governors University. I was trying to take it in. And I said, but I mean, is this university, would I be working for the governor? And they said, oh, no, it's a university out of Salt Lake. And I said, well, I didn't move to Indiana to work for a company in Salt Lake. And then they described the mission of saying, no, this will open up access to education for working adults who have some college and no degree. But for WGU, they may never finish that degree. And that's when it became just this magical moment of me saying, boy, wouldn't I be so fortunate if I could start this university and maybe put my hand to something that would help advance opportunities for Hoosiers. And so it was because it was education, which I'm passionate about, of course, but it was really just being able to roll up my sleeves, try something new, which I'm fond of. I do love change and new opportunities, and I love risk. And this was all of that. And then just that it would really help Hoosiers. So I was thrilled to have that chance to launch this university. And that's how that connection happened. So it was exciting, and I'd never heard of that,
Yeah, well, you talk about change and risk and new adventures. That's certainly the case in your career. We're going to talk about that. But how about this most recent jump from WGU Indiana to leading the Indiana Fever? How did that all come about?
Well, it was interesting because I was working still at WGU. I'd moved into a national role. So I was chancellor and then moved to chancellor emeritus, and took on a new role of being the new president of advancement. WGU didn't have a foundation, and they asked me to start that, which was wonderful. And I was happy to do it. And we were well on our way, just starting that new foundation. And on a Friday morning, I received a phone call from Rick Fuson, the president of Pacer Sports Entertainment. And I honestly thought that he was calling to see if I could, join them at the Chamber of Commerce lunch or the economic lunch. Because you know how that is. Sometimes when you get that, you've got some friends that it's like, oh no, somebody canceled. Who can I call and ask them to join our table an hour before the lunch? So I was expecting that phone call from Rick. And instead, when I answered, he said, why don't you come talk to us about, being the president of the Fever? And, just out of the blue was how that happened. But I immediately was captivated by the opportunity to really take on a role that would help advance the role of girls, the opportunity for girls and women. And just I love the platform of this diversity and inclusion and the way that the WNBA has embraced opportunities. And I thought maybe I could put my hand to something new that would help Hoosiers in a different way. And that was, timing was interesting. I'd moved to a national role. So I'm back into that DC kind of national space, but really still longing to do more in our city and our state. And this seemed like the perfect opportunity to I love the game of basketball, but really to advance important issues that I think will lead to long-term success for kids and our society.
Yeah. And sports is your passion. I mean, that's not surprising you would take a role in sports from the aspect of, as a child growing up in Northwest Indiana, you absolutely love sports, right?
I do. I love basketball. So I play all sports, love basketball. There's just something about, I got a basketball when I was 10. My parents bought me a basketball hoop, one of those kind that, you can move around your driveway and whenever you need it to move out of the way for cars and family reunions, but it's always there when you need it. And I spent hours on that driveway shooting hoops because just, there's certain things about basketball. Number one, you can really compete and practice by yourself. You don't need a lot of people to help you. You can, every time you get out there, you can just focus on something. And the more you focus on it and work on it, the better you get. I mean, there are just so many parallels to the game of basketball that I think are great foundational skills for life. I wasn't thinking that at the age of 10, of course, but I know that's true looking back on it. And so, I think if I would have gotten a phone call on a Friday morning from any other sports team, I would have been flattered for sure. I'm not sure I would have jumped at it, but for the game of basketball, because I really love it.
Yeah, I saw an interesting story about when you were a youngster, you received a gift from an uncle, a Wilson leather baseball glove, and you've kept that, have it in a glass case. Tell me about that story.
Well, I'm so fortunate to grow up around all of my family, my great aunts, my great uncles, my great grandparents. Just that's all we did. It's just typical. We're Assyrian is our nationality. We don't even know, very few people know Assyrians, but everything you did was family. Well, my great uncle was a big time Cubs fan. So as am I because of that, or am I? But we played baseball all the time. And one day he took me out to a little sports store, and he bought me this Wilson baseball glove, my first ever leather glove. Before that, I had kind of those, little kid plastic gloves and a baseball. And we got home and I was just over the moon excited. I raced in the house and I showed it to my mom, and man, I just thrilled about it. And she was excited for me. And then I went outside to play. And the next thing, she and my great uncle met and talked about it. And then they called me back in the house. And my mom said, honey, that's a really great gift, but it's very expensive. And that's a gift that you need to earn and work toward. And so you get to keep that glove. You can keep your glove, but you have to earn it. And so every Saturday I would go to my great uncle's house and do chores. And he paid me a certain amount of money per hour. He probably overpaid me because he was that kind of great uncle. But he paid me every hour until I made enough money to equal the cost of that baseball glove. And in that, when I look back at the reason I have it encased and I have a plaque on it and it says, work ethic, love mom, because I kept that glove all through grade school, all through junior high. I took care of that glove because I worked to earn that glove. And in that moment, I think my mom just taught me this valuable lesson of a work ethic that, whatever you work for, and when you work for something, you value it. And that was a really important lesson to me.
Yeah.
But to that end, when I was playing in grade school, softball, baseball, and I let a boy borrow my glove. He didn't have a glove. So he was in the outfield. And when he came back at the change of the inning, he threw my glove and it hit the dirt and the sand and got filthy. And I was so mad. I picked it up and I shook it off. I'm like, you can never use my glove again. And that was when I knew. I'm like, you value, when you work for it, you value it.
Yeah. Your parents were both educators, right? And they obviously have had a major influence on your life in a lot of different ways.
My mom was a school teacher. My grandmother, my great aunt were secretaries in the Gary school system. My great grandmother was an educator back in Old Country. My dad worked at Moody Bible Institute and then at Ball State in construction management. So education, careers in education is really, and my sister works at WGU. So it is our family business. And I never saw myself as a school teacher. When I was in high school, I wanted to be the president of a company. That was a little bit of a stretch of a goal for a girl from Northwest Indiana in a small Christian school. It wasn't really the site that people put their, mind toward. But I realized that teaching was so important and such a great start for a career because it really, if you love learning, and I do, and if you can get into a classroom and share that with students, their success will be their own success, but it'll be inspired by that love of learning, which takes people a really long way, I think, in life.
Yeah. Now, some people marry their high school sweethearts, but you actually married your grade school sweetheart. Is that right? Lyndon, who's an attorney here in Indianapolis.
That's right. Isn't that a crazy story? We were fierce competitors in grade school, especially on the sports every time. If we played on the same team together, we were magic and we were the best athletes in this class, I think, if I remember that correctly. If we were on opposite teams, oh my word, we hated each other because we both wanted to so badly. I came home one day and I just said to my mom, there's a boy in my class, Allison Barber. I don't like him now, but I'm going to marry him someday. And it was interesting. I didn't really like boys, but I was just so taken by Lyndon's ability, character, and his traits and his poise. It was very, I just knew that he'd be the right guy for me. And then in our first date was a revival service in 6th grade. We sat next to each other in church, super romantic. So that was, his dad was a pastor. We were always in the church and Christian school. So that's kind of the path our little budding romance took, was a lot of church time together. But we've been really, really fortunate, Gary. It's a blessing to find somebody that has the same kind of compass that you have and values the same things you value. And we've been really blessed.
Very good. Okay, we're at the time now, Allison. In the podcast each week, we do what we call a 2-minute drill, where I ask you a couple quick questions and get your quick responses. Are you up for the task?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Beach or mountains?
Jeez, that's hard. I don't really like either, but if I had to choose one, I'd take a beach.
Okay. Country or city?
City.
Ambition or comfort?
Ambition.
Fiction or nonfiction?
Nonfiction. I never read a fiction. I've never read a fiction.
Favorite way to relax? How do you kind of unwind?
Oh gosh, I love being in a crowd. if you can get me into the biggest crowd, that is the best way for me to unwind and relax.
Interesting. Okay. Very good. Favorite snack?
Candy, cheap candy. Cheap. Don't give me Godiva. I want Good and Plenty and lemon heads.
Good. Okay. Other than family, most important mentor. You could name two if you want, but most important mentor.
I would say Elizabeth Dole and Secretary Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense when I worked there.
Your DC days. Okay. Final question. Favorite dinner guest. If you had three people, non-family members, living or deceased, who you would like to invite for that ultimate dinner, who would those three people be?
Claire Barton, Eleanor Roosevelt, Oprah Winfrey.
Okay, that would be quite a table. Very good. Well, you passed with flying colors, Allison, the 2-minute drill. So A+ on that. Your career has really gone, as I have read, I thought it was a great way to phrase it. Your career has gone from the schoolhouse to the White House to the field house and many places in between, including the Pentagon and the palace of Saddam Hussein, where you were on a very special mission. We'll get into that and a lot more when the Business and Beyond podcast continues. Stay with us.
The Healthiest Employers Award program is now open to companies of all sizes in the state of Indiana. We have created a community of wellness leaders from across the country dedicated to cultivating a more proactive approach to employee health and well-being. To nominate your organization, visit us online at healthiestemployers.com. Healthiest Employers, the nation's leading corporate well-being award.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is Indiana Fever President, Dr. Allison Barber. And Allison, your career, and we touched on it in the first part of the podcast, your career has taken on many twists and turns. I think I have this right. You were teaching and coaching in grade school in Northwest Indiana. Lyndon, your husband, is practicing law. And then was it the Gulf War that really kind of changed everything?
That's exactly right, Gary. The first Gulf War broke out, and Lyndon came home, and we watched it on the news like everyone. And he came home and he said, I really want to serve the country. And I was inspired by that. Nobody in his family, his great uncle had served, but nobody in his immediate family had had military experience or background. But he just had a passion, and so he went to a local recruiter of all things. And that's how unaware we were and uninformed, this is before the internet where you could search everything. And he went to meet with a recruiter, and they said, we can ship you out on Saturday. And he's like, I'm a practicing attorney. I can't ship out on Saturday. So over the course of the next several months, he resigned his position and signed up for the Army JAG Corps, where they needed lawyers. So he went to training. And then a few months later, I in the semester break, I quit my job. And we packed up everything. And for the first time, other than college, I moved from Indiana, and we got stationed in New Jersey. And then from New Jersey, relocated to Washington, D.C. And so we've had, Lyndon, I'm really proud of him. He was 8 years active duty and then spent out the rest of did 21 years, finished it out in the reserves, served our country nobly, and really fulfilled a passion that he had of doing his part for our nation. And so I was happy to join in that mission with him, but it took us on a path that we never imagined,
Yeah. We'll talk about those years or that time in New Jersey, because you had several jobs that ultimately led you to the American Red Cross, right? To their national headquarters?
That's the thing, Gary, when I look back on it, it's interesting to me because I think this is what people find. It's hard to change careers. It's not hard to get new jobs. It's hard to change careers. It's not hard for me now. I'm in my 8th career. So now I've kind of, got a pattern for it. But back then I'd taught school for 6 years. I had my bachelor's and my master's from IU in education. And so any job I applied for, people said, well, you're a teacher. But I was ready to try something new. And I couldn't get anyone to see what I could offer because they saw me as a teacher. And quite frankly, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I gave myself 7 weeks. I gave myself a budget of $100 a week to pay for gas and food and whatever it would take to do this. And I decided I would take on every job interview that I could have. Anybody would give me a job interview. I went on over 50 job interviews, everything from door to door inside media sales to car sales to a temp agency in New York City to an acting agency for TV commercials that didn't go so well. But just every interview, because I thought, okay, if I don't know what I want to do, let me figure out what I don't want to do. And that pursuit of 50 job interviews really shaped what I did like or didn't like in different opportunities. At the same time, probably a couple of weeks into it, I was a little bit dismayed by this pursuit. And my husband said, have you thought about volunteering at the Red Cross? I'd been a volunteer at the Red Cross since I was 16. So it's definitely my charity, which is why I'd love to invite Clara Barton to dinner because she founded the Red Cross. So I went to the local Red Cross and just said, could I volunteer? And oh boy, that was perfect. I found my purpose and started volunteering. And then they asked me to oversee this program. Like they hired me as a temp. So every day I would get up in New Jersey and I'd go to a warehouse all by myself, standing in a warehouse, package and shipping these products. It was freeze-dried tissue for orthopedic surgery. So tissue services at the Red Cross. The manufacturing plant was in New Jersey, of all things. So here I am with my master's in education, standing in a warehouse all by myself, taking orders off of an old fax machine and packaging boxes of freeze-dried tissues to ship to doctors' offices. It wasn't glamorous, not glamorous, but somehow I didn't mind because it was part of this Red Cross mission, which I loved. And a few months later, the program moved to Washington, D.C., and the folks at the D.C. office said, would you interview to be the manager of this program? And, it was the piece of it was exciting for me was, it was magical because, Gary, back when I was teaching school in Northwest Indiana, in the summers, I was lifeguarding and running up the pool and tennis at a country club. One day I'm clocking in, back in the old days where you had to clock in, and I was clocking in. On the wall was the Department of Labor rules that they always have to post, and it was signed by the Secretary of Labor, Elizabeth Dole. One day I was clocking in and I said, I'm going to work for her someday. I'm in Northwest Indiana. I'm going to work for her someday. And now I'm in New Jersey, offered a job at Red Cross. And guess who the president of the Red Cross was? Elizabeth Dole. Yeah. So here now I get this job at the Red Cross. I'm working under Elizabeth Dole. And we moved to DC and spent 20 years there. And I just loved, I was at Red Cross for 6 years and just loved being a part of that. And I'm still a Red Cross volunteer today because I just love the mission.
Yeah. You make the jump then from the Red Cross to the Pentagon. How did that happen? And that, again, another kind of reinvention, if you will, in your career.
Yeah, I went from the Red Cross to an ad agency that the Red Cross used. And then I resigned from the ad agency because we got Army orders to go to Germany. So I resigned my Red Cross or my ad agency job. Then the Army delayed our orders and then canceled our orders. So then I was unemployed. So I started my own business because during my months of unemployment, I was volunteering at the Red Cross, babysitting for my friend who just had a baby and visiting my dear friend who had cancer. And I loved having the freedom to do those three things. So now I had to find a job. And I said to Lyndon, well, I can't work for anybody else because then I can't volunteer, can't babysit, and can't visit my friend. So I started my own PR business because it's not very inspirational. I get it that you start your own company because you want to volunteer, babysit, and visit your sick friend. But that's what I did. And then one of my clients was Tori Clark, who was running Hill and Knowlton Public Relations in DC. And then she was selected to be the spokesperson at the Pentagon. And when the Bush administration picked her to be the spokesperson, they said to Tori, you can bring one person with you. So one day I'm just doing my work and she gives me this note on this big binders from the Pentagon. And she said, want to go with me, TC. So I thought she had a meeting at the Pentagon that she wanted me to go with her. I said, sure, when's the meeting? She goes, no, do you want to go work with me at the Pentagon? And that's how I got my job at the Pentagon.
Wow.
Because I have a business. Isn't that crazy? I wanted to volunteer, babysit, and visit my sick friend, which led to Tori being my client, which led to me getting a job at the Pentagon.
And you were at the Pentagon on 9/11, right? You were there. Talk about that. I mean, I can't imagine what that experience and your experiences in the Pentagon must have been like through that period.
Yeah, I started in the Pentagon in May of that year. And it was, that was surreal, as you might imagine. You think you're busy in life, and then you go to work at the Pentagon, and then you're really busy, and the pace and the intensity, and it's unlike anything I had experienced. And then on the morning of September 11th, I actually boarded a flight that morning at 6 a.m. to fly to Atlanta to meet with J. Walter Thompson, the ad agency. And they were pitching us on a new campaign. And the concept of the campaign was, how do we inspire more people to enlist into the military? So it was a recruitment campaign. When I landed in Atlanta with some of my colleagues from the Pentagon, we took the underground train right downtown to J. Walter Thompson. So we went underground, took the elevator up. And when we got in the office, the receptionist was there and she was panicky. And she said, "Are you from the Pentagon?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, plane just hit the World Trade Tower." I said, "Can you get me to a TV?" So she got me to a television. And by the time I got to the TV, I looked at the television. I said, "The Pentagon's on fire." And a man in the conference room said, "A plane just went into the Pentagon." And, like everybody, our world changed in those moments. And so I called my husband, and all the phone lines were down. He worked across the street from the Pentagon at the Drug Enforcement Administration, and he actually saw the explosion. And so all the phone lines were down. So I couldn't get in touch with my husband. I called my mom back here in Indiana. I said, "Mom, I just want to let you know I'm not in the Pentagon." And she's okay. Well, my husband walked 2 miles to get to a phone that would work so he could call my parents. And when he called, he said, "I just want to let you know Allie's not at the Pentagon today." And she said, "No, I know. I just heard from her." And it was years later, Gary, where I heard my husband tell that story. And he's like, "That was the first time I knew that Allie was safe." Because, I was in a plane, like a lot of people were in a plane that morning. Nobody knew, the destination of those planes. So then we were in Atlanta. All the planes were shut down. There were no rental cars at the airport. So I got a phone book of all things and went through it and found a local car rental place in the city and asked them if they had anything I could rent. They said, "Oh, we have a 15-passenger van. You can rent it. You want it?" And so I did, and I got my colleagues, and we drove back and got back to the Pentagon the next day. And it was, I parked my car. I walked into my office, and to get to my office, I had to walk by 3 armed guards, this full SWAT, rifles, everything. It was surreal that just the day before I could just walk to my office and walk to the restroom and walk wherever. And it just was surreal. And then, the president came and visited the crash site, and we were, the intensity as it should was, beyond belief of how hard we worked to regroup and keep moving forward at the same time. My role was, I went to visit the wounded in the hospital. I went and spent days with the family members who lost loved one. And it was a meaningful and touching and really, really difficult time.
Yeah, a lot of different stories and things you experienced during your time at the Pentagon. But one, and I know I teed it up a little while ago, you were in charge of an important mission to set up a media center, right? And you were literally, physically in Saddam Hussein's palace. Tell me about that.
I was overseeing all of the communication for the Pentagon. So Armed Forces Radio and Television, Stars and Stripes newspaper, so broadcasting TV in 147 countries, I think. So I was in that was part of my job at the Pentagon. And then I was assigned to we're over in the Situation Room at the White House. And Dr. Rice really wanted this communication center set up, because if you think about it, Gary, in Iraq, they would have a story running in the media. And then because of the time difference, then London would have a story running in the media after Iraq. And then, America wakes up, and then we have to deal with 2 news cycles that we missed. So because we didn't have people in Iraq involved in the media stories, we were always playing defense, always playing catch up, always trying to figure out what truth was. So Condi really wanted this international press center set up, and they had tried different ways to get it going and different people and the generals over there, but everybody was so busy. So we're in the Situation Room. My boss and I were in there with a lot of people. And Condi's like, "What's it going to take to set up this international press center?" And then my boss, Larry DeRita, is like, "Well, if you want something done, you could just give it to Allison." And she's like, "Good." And I'm standing there I'm looking around like, "You've got to be kidding me. I'm not that," like, there were a lot of people like, "Put me in, coach, sign me up. I'll go to Afghanistan. I'll go to Iraq." And I'm a little bit I wasn't that person, but by the way, nobody asked me like, oh, do you want to go to Iraq? It's like, nope, pack your bags. You're going. And
You're going. Yeah.
that's exactly what happened. And so we flew up, we flew into Kuwait. And then that night, that early next morning, you get on a military plane and you just sit in jump seats and they tell you, don't be surprised if you get sick, because when you fly into Iraq, you do a corkscrew landing. So your plane comes in over Iraq and then nose dives, and then it rolls to one side and then straightens out, rolls to the other side. And you're just in this constant dive, and you're in jump seats, and then boom, you land. And the reason they do that, they tell you before you get on the plane, the reason they land that corkscrew landing is because it makes it harder for the enemy to shoot your plane down. I know, Gary, it's surreal. I'm like, I am a first grade school teacher from Millerville. I did not sign up for this, right? But nobody asked. So I went in, and then I got in early. So I took a bus to the green zone where Saddam's palace was, because nobody was there to meet me. So I just jumped on the local bus. I walk into the palace. I find a colonel. I said, hi, I'm Allison Barber. He's like, ma'am, how did you get here? I said, I just took the city bus. And he said, the suicide bus? I'm like, I said, well, that wasn't on the flashing light.
Yeah, that wasn't on the bus. Yeah.
I might have not gotten on it if I would have known that's what it was known for. And so then I worked out of Saddam's palace and stayed there. That's where I, bunked down, was in his son's palace right there. And it was an unbelievable experience. What was interesting is the day I got there, I went up to the roof of his palace and overlooked the city. And it was, what was fascinating to me, Gary, is when you stand on the palace and you look around the city, what I saw were statues of Saddam. Everything was a tribute and in celebration of Saddam. And it was, it was just interesting to me that I thought about, when I stand on the roof at the Pentagon, everything I see in DC is a celebration of freedom. The Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial and all of the things in DC represent freedom, and everything in Iraq represented Saddam and dictatorship. And I mean, it was just interesting to see the contrast there.
What were your emotions like over there? Obviously, you were focused on the task at hand, which was substantial, and that occupied your mind. But being in that environment and seeing and experiencing those things firsthand, what was that like?
You're so busy that you don't even realize what's happening. It really is all consuming. I had 2 sessions though with local Iraqis. We were teaching them how to be press people, and because they didn't have a free press. So I've had people teaching them, like, this is how you ask questions of leaders. And because if they would have done that before, their tongues would have been cut out, or they could have been killed. I mean, that was interesting to see the hunger of the local Iraqis for a free press. And this man was in his probably 50s, and he raised his hand and he said, when I write my headline, what words do I capitalize? Because he wanted to get it just right. And it was amazing to me. And another Iraqi came over and said, when you see the President Bush, will you thank him for helping us get our freedom? And I said, well, why don't you write him a letter and I'll take it to him, which I did. And it was just like to see the joy. It was difficult for sure, but to see the joy and the hope in the local Iraqi people, that was really inspiring. But some days it was scary. I went to Iraq a few times, and one day we were flying to northern Iraq, and I always was transported in Black Hawk helicopters, and I was flanked by Apache helicopters with young soldiers with guns coming out of the sides, and I hadn't seen that before. So I said to the general who was my host, I said, what's their mission today? He said, they're protecting you. And I'm like, heavens, you're almost in this different universe. Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And then when we got to our meeting in Tikrit, this local Iraqi officer got up and he was talking about, he's like, I love America. I want to build a bridge from Iraq to America. And he was so passionate. And the U.S. officer sitting next to me said, man, I wish you wouldn't talk like that. We're in a big group. And I said, well, why? He said, well, you see those 3 men sitting against the wall over there. And I said, yeah. He said, well, they're known assassins and they want to kill him.
Wow.
And I'm like, I mean, how do you even process that?
Yeah.
The, you can't, I could not make sense of my reality. I mean, that's how it was just, it, so you just put your head down and you just kept doing the job because otherwise you'd be scared out of your mind.
Yeah, yeah. Fast forward to today, obviously very different challenges, much different environment as you lead the Indiana Fever. But talk about your role now, the team. I know at least so far, challenging one-loss record on the court. But talk about your goals for the organization, how you feel about the franchise.
Yeah, Gary, it's interesting that I think you can take your competencies that you build across every job and apply them to the next challenge and opportunity. When I came to the Fever, I came to the Fever for the same inspiration and that I was a school teacher. Like you can really see a pathway by using sports to help inspire children. I was at a basketball camp yesterday and I saw these 5 and 6 year olds and they were trying to learn how to dribble and how to shoot the ball with, just get the form corrected. And I saw that and I thought, this is why I love this job, because teaching children how to compete is really healthy. Working in a team environment, it was not, it's not dissimilar from being at the Pentagon, is that you have to really align yourself on what is the mission and have agreement on that mission, because it's going to have some dark days. You're going to have some difficult personnel issues or injuries on your team. You're going to have a tough record to start off your season. So, but what you find is if you have people of character around you and really alignment in mission, and our mission really is to, just improve society through this great game of basketball. And we do it with our tenants. We have 3 C's and it's just, when I worked at the Pentagon, we had our bubble with 3 bubbles in it, it was recruit and retain and win the war on terrorism. And it just like, if you just put a structure around your goal. So for the Fever, it's commit, compete, and contribute. And everything we do, it better fit into that alignment of that structure, because if we do, then that's how we'll build a championship culture. But you have to take the long view. It's not a quick fix. It's not a quick win. But that's not different from corporate America or working at the Red Cross either. It's just every day you show up and you commit to doing what's right, focus on your goals. And that's what we're doing at the Fever. And just, I think our future is bright. Our current reality is difficult. But that's, if it were easy, anybody would do it, right?
Right. And really your passion for what you do, part of it derives from the fact that when you were young, you loved sports, wanted to compete in sports, and really didn't have the opportunity because there weren't girls and women's teams back then. Today, there are so many opportunities, more and more. Although, as you and I were talking, I know recently together, the disparities between men's and women's sports, be it in terms of coverage in the media, advertising dollars, still is large.
Yeah, that's right. When I was in grade school, I was at a small Christian school. They didn't have sports. So if you wanted to be involved, the only thing you could do was be a cheerleader. I don't have anything against cheerleading. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to compete. Right. And one day my dad and I are walking out of the basketball gym. I was in high school I'm in my cheerleading uniform, and the basketball after the game rolls by my feet and I pick it up and I shoot the basket from just, inside of the half court line of a few feet inside of it, shoot the ball and swish it. Now, no boy on my team could make that shot. Yeah. I make the shot. And all the boys are like, man, I can't believe it. And they said, you can't do it again. And I just looked at him and I said, I don't have to. And my dad and I walked off. I don't know if my dad was ever prouder of me than in that moment, but I wanted to play and I couldn't. So I'm excited about, and I'm so happy that there are opportunities for girls at all ages now to compete, and if they choose to and want to, and that it's a good platform for everything. 85% of female executives played sports, 85%, because it teaches you teamwork and competition and drive and determination. So these are all good things. And I want every child to be able to, play sports.
Well, Allison Barber, your career story is a fascinating one, and certainly you have given back and continue to give back to community and country. And it's been great to be able to sit down and have a conversation, to talk a little bit about that and get your thoughts. Really appreciate it. Continued great success to you and to Lyndon and your entire family.
Thanks, Gary. It's always great to be with you.
All right. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. It's a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can check out all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is check out InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. We'll see you next time.